Hi everybody, Jim Sammons here from the Kayak Fishing Show. You know, I've been involved in professionally in the sport of kayak fishing for over 20 years. In that time, whether it's while I'm out on the water with a guided trip, at a trade show, or via the internet, I've probably heard every question there is imaginable about the sport of kayak fishing. So I put together a list of some of the more frequently asked questions that I get. Now I got 29 questions here that just off the top of my head I wrote down that people are always asking me. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to rip through these, give you a very short answer to all these questions, and then later on, of course, we'll probably dive in a little deeper and do more thorough videos on the answers to these questions, particularly if you give me some comments at the end of the video or ask some more questions down in that comment section below. And then I'll cover these questions a lot more deeply later on. But right now, these are going to be some short and sweet answers to the most frequently asked questions I get on kayak fishing. So, number one, is kayak fishing fun? Well, heck yeah, man. I've been doing it for over 25 years. So yeah, a lot of fun. We have a great time, whether catching small fish or big fish. Kayak fishing is fun. What is the best kayak for me? Well, you know, there is no definitive answer on that because everybody's different. You know, your things you need to consider is the water you're going to be paddling. How tall are you? How heavy are you? What's your budget? Do you have any storage limitations? So the nice thing is with all these manufacturers out there, and even amongst one line with so many different types of water to fish, there's a kayak fish. There is a kayak for everybody who wants to kayak fish. So get out there and try some out. Are kayaks stable? Yeah, you know, you can get kayaks that are fast, or you can get kayaks that are stable, and you can get them anywhere in between. There are kayaks that are so stable you can dance on them, and they got kayaks that'll hold the biggest guy and still be stable. So a lot of very, very stable boats out there. Do you have a kayak big enough for me? Yeah, said it before. There are kayaks big enough for the biggest guys. Do you prefer a longer or a shorter kayak? Well, basically the longer the kayak, the faster the kayak. The shorter the kayak, the more maneuverable the kayak. So just based on the water you're paddling. For my offshore stuff, yeah, I like a longer, faster kayak. For smaller bodies of water where I want to do sight casting and that sort of thing, shorter, wider. Number 6, I see there's a couple pedal kayaks out there. Why do you still paddle? Well, quite honestly, I've been a paddler for forever, and I love paddling. That's not to say that pedal boats aren't great. They do some things much better than paddling kayaks, and then they do some things worse. So for me, it's just a matter of having the right tool for the job. Sometimes I pedal, you know, the Jackson Kayak's got that new pedal boat out, the Coosa FD. For a lot of the skinny water, offshore stuff, going through the kelp, I prefer paddling. So find the right tool for you. Should I spend the money on a carbon fiber paddle? Well, yeah, if you're a paddler, then what I generally tell people is whatever your budget is, you know, spend the money and get the best paddle you can afford. Carbon fiber, lighter, stiffer blades, more efficient, well worth it. What do you do if a fish starts to pull you out to sea? Well, as we say, you know, sit back and enjoy the sleigh ride, because that's all what it's part of it. A bass this big will tow the kayak. So you can imagine how fun it is when you hook into a big fish. So as long as you have the right equipment and you're aware of where you're headed and your abilities to get back, just sit back and enjoy the ride. Do big fish ever pull you off your kayak? What I always tell people is, do big fish ever pull you off a boat? You know, there's no reason a big fish should pull you off your kayak. If your drags are set properly, you're never going to get pulled off. Just let that fish pull you around, know your limitations, and you know, you can land plenty big fish. You'll never get pulled off. What do you do if you tip over? Well, number one, know how to do a self-rescue. Have a PFD have a PFD on at all times, but mainly know how to self-rescue in case you do happen to go for a swim due to a boat wake or anything like that. Where do you put fish if you catch them and want to keep them? Well, I personally have an insulated game bag that goes down inside my hull with some ice packs. I always say if I'm going to keep fish, I'm going to keep them right. So I always bleed my fish out and put them down inside the hull on ice. The main thing is we don't, particularly as saltwater guys, you don't want to leave fish hanging off the side of the boat. And this brings up this one. Aren't you afraid of sharks? Well, I don't want to invite any unwanted guests by leaving fish hanging off the side of my kayak. But generally speaking, no, I'm not afraid of sharks. We see them all the time. You know, most of them, no big deal. But I do also use a shark shield when we're in those particularly sharky waters. Can you fly fish from a kayak? Yeah, and actually there's some really fly fishing specific kayaks out there right now. Jackson Kayak has the Mayfly, which is specifically designed for stand-up fly casting. There's nothing on that boat that's going to hang up your line. So yeah, fly fishing is awesome off the kayak. Number 14, where do you keep your beer? Well, you know, you can put a cooler. There's plenty of room on most of the kayaks. I personally keep the beers for shore. And you all know, if you've watched these things, I do love beer. But I don't drink when I'm on the water because I always want to make sure that I've got my wits about me and I'll have all the energy I need to paddle back. Is it hard to sit in a kayak all day if you have a bad back? And I hear this question all the time. And I know very well the answer to this because I have a very bad back. I've had back surgery. I mean, my back's a wreck. What I will generally say is, if I'm having a problem with my back at that particular time, I generally don't want to be in my kayak. But if I'm feeling okay and I start paddling and then I paddle more and more over a few days or over weeks, the more I paddle, the more I can paddle. It just strengthens up that core, strengthens up my back. So when I'm on a regular paddling schedule, the back isn't an issue. And I'll tell you what, with the seats that are on the kayaks now compared to what I used to be in years ago, these seats are so comfortable. Sitting in a kayak all day is no big deal. If you can sit in a beach chair, you can sit in a kayak. What do you do if you have to go to the bathroom? Well, let's just say you can, and we'll let you figure out how to do it. Can I put a motor on my kayak? Sure. Torpedo makes a great one. I mean, just that is super light, very efficient. In most states, if you put a motor on your kayak, you do have to then register your kayak. So you just need to be aware of that. But yeah, if that's going to work for you, having a motor on a kayak just gives you a little bit more range and, you know, makes it really fun. Should I get a tandem or a single kayak? I generally prefer to have a single. The only time I like using a tandem is if it's with a young kid. You know, it's a great way to get a kid out on the water. But two adults, for me personally, you're just in too close a proximity to each other when you're throwing lures and that sort of thing. So, I mean, I know there's plenty of people who do it, but for my personal preference, I would rather have a couple of singles than a tandem. One I get all the time is, why do I carry so many rods? Because you'll look at a lot of pictures of me and there's like 6 rods on my kayak. Straight up honest, I'm lazy. I like to have different rods rigged for different things so I'm not having to retie all the time when on the water. So, you know, I'll have something specific for catching bait, something specific for throwing a lure. I'll usually have a couple of rods for trolling bait and that sort of thing. So, you know, very quickly end up with 5-6 rods on the back of my boat. Can you keep bait alive in a kayak? Yeah, you know, with like the Kraken, we've got it set up so you can easily put a live bait tank on the kayak. And most kayaks, you can figure out a way to do it and plumb them out. It's just having a bait tank on the kayak, to me personally, a lot of guys will use bait tubes. I would personally rather have 5 gallons of water sitting on my kayak than having to drag one. So yeah, you can carry live bait very efficiently. Do you wear a wetsuit when it's cold? No, I don't personally. I find wetsuits very uncomfortable. They tend to be hot, too hot when it's warm out. And if it's cold out, if they get damp, they tend to be cold. So I'd rather have good quality dry gear, paddling gear, stuff that I'm going to be dry in rather than wet. Wetsuits are made to keep you warm when you're in the water and you're wet. They're not necessarily meant to keep you warm when you're sitting on a kayak and you've gotten wet and then wind is blowing through them. So good quality dry gear, in my opinion, is a better way to go. Should I take a kayak fishing class? You know what? It's all up to you. You can go out there and learn the hard way, or you can shorten your learning curve by going out with a guide for a day. I can guarantee you, as a guide myself, that you go out with me for a day, you're going to learn a lot. And the whole thing is just shortening that learning curve so you can be a better and safer kayak fisherman. Do I need to register my kayak? Again, that's back to, in most states, at least, you know, in California particularly where I am, you do not need to register your kayak unless you put a motor on it. Do I need a PFD on the kayak? Well, you don't need a kayak PFD on the kayak. You need a PFD on your body. But in California anyway, again, you must have a PFD with you. You don't necessarily legally have to wear it, but if you want to be safe on the water, you know, wear your PFD at all times, because having a PFD strapped to your kayak, I mean, there literally have been kayaks found with PFD strapped to them and then the person was gone. So yeah, the kayak lived, but the person didn't. So always wear your PFD. Can you put a fish finder or other electronics on the kayak? Oh, of course. You know, and guys will put little inexpensive $100 units, and guys will put, you know, $1,000 units and better on their kayaks. So yeah, for sure. It's a great tool. I use the Dragonfly, or the Raymarine Dragonfly, on my kayak, and it's a wonderful, wonderful unit. And then of course other electronics, VHF, that sort of thing. I've seen guys rig their kayaks up with lights and all kinds of stuff. So, you know, speaker systems, everything. So, you know, whatever your mind can imagine, you can do. But, you know, saltwater and electronics is tough. So, but we all, you know, if you want to be better, get more fish, definitely put a fish finder in your kayak. It really helps. Where should I put my rod holders? There's no right or wrong answer here. There's no right or wrong way to rig up a kayak. You know, put things where you want them. What I generally tell people when they're rigging up a kayak, though, is everything should be accessible but out of the way. So if you're putting rod holders in front of you or behind you, you know, you want to make sure they're out of your paddle stroke. You want to make sure they're out of the way when you're like going to land a fish and that sort of thing. So I usually say if you're just getting into it, start out slow, put a couple rod holders on the boat, and then start adding them as you learn how you want them. Am I going to get wet? It's a water sport. You're going to get wet. Particularly if you're an offshore guy and punching through waves and all that. But again, wearing the proper clothing, you don't really have to worry about that. So, you know, in the colder weather, you know, dry suits and waders and all that to keep you warm and comfortable. So just dress for the conditions, the air conditions and the water conditions. What's the best color of a kayak? Well, you know, I could say that the colors I prefer are usually dull. You know, I generally personally don't like bright colored kayaks, but I can also tell you firsthand as a boater that guys in the duller colored kayaks are much harder to see. So if you want to be seen, having a bright colored kayak is really, really key. And like I said, and I'm telling you this as a boater myself, I've been out there on my boat, and the guys in these dull colored kayaks, particularly in early mornings, in the evenings, are very hard to see compared to the brighter colored kayaks. So there you go. That's a quick rundown of the frequently asked questions I get about kayak fishing. If you have any more questions, please put them down below. If you want a little more insight to any of these things I just talked about, again, please put it down below. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll give us a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to Kayak Fishing Tales. Remember, please always wear your PFD, and I hope to see you on the water.